Today for our spotlight interview, we have Kamilah Foreman, who is going to be the incoming chair of the 2021 NMPS conference. Kamilah, could you introduce yourself in a few words?
Sure. So, as Nikki said, my name is Kamilah Foreman. I am the Director of Publications at DIA Art Foundation, and I am speaking to you from a recording from Harlem in New York.
Excellent. And we've given these questions to Kamilah in advance, so we're going to dive right in here. Thanks for doing this interview with us today. The first question, when did you first hear about the University of Chicago Graham School?
Probably sometime between 1997 and 2001 when I was an undergraduate at what we then called U of C before the U Chicago rebranding.
When did you first hear about the National Museum Publishing Seminar?
Probably around 2007, right before the conference was in Chicago in 2008. And back then, I was an editor at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago.
Also, the same institution that designed our NMPS logo. Thanks, James Goggin. What's your top priority for NMPS 2021?
Definitely greater access and inclusion. The pivot to digital last year brought in so many more people. And I would love to see those people involved on the planning committee, proposing sessions, lightning rounds, and those, sessions get approved and they're shown at the conference and we can continue to grow who's a part of this community. It would really be lovely to see people from smaller institutions where there's maybe a department of one or two, people from outside the continental United States, more professionals of color, and certainly because we tend to be very dominated in the visual arts, people from historical societies or science museums, or one of my favorite people to meet at the last conference, someone who works for a parks department.
You served on the 2020 Planning Committee. What did you most enjoy about your role as a committee member?
I most enjoy working with other planning committee members and what I learned from them. It was a good mix of people, some of whom were new, like me, to the planning committee and had only attended a couple of conferences. And some were people who'd gone to several NMPSs and had been on the planning committee beforehand. And what was really cool is, this is a little bit meta, but my job as a publisher is to think about how we talk to the public about something. And my job as a member of a planning committee is to think about how we talk about the work that we do to a group of people who think about how we talk about things to the public. And that actually was kind of a fascinating thing to learn.
A lot has changed since we had that, our last in-person conference. We obviously started planning for 2020 in a physical sense and then had to become digital very quickly. So a lot of those collaborations or those meta conversations had to happen sometimes from home in our work from home setups. What is your work from home setup like right now?
So a funny thing happened on March 13th. A funny thing happened to a lot of people, but for me, this room used to be a second bedroom where my youngest sister lived in. She moved out 3 days before lockdown on March 13th. So this room is now a living room, which meant that the combined dining room, living room could be converted into a combined dining room / office. So I'm also quite lucky in that DIA gives me a laptop so I can keep all work business on a separate machine. So in the mornings I come in, I open up that machine, pull out my notebook, my notebooks, my pens, and because I'm an editor, my number 2 pencil and my eraser. And I work at my great grandmother's kitchen table. And when it's time to eat, I put the office away. And when it's time to go back to work, I pull the office out. And at the end of the day, I close the office down because that's where I eat again. And I have to put the office away for the evening and for weekends. And that has really helped my mental health.
It sounds like you're advocating for a division of time and physical space. What would you say your top tip, and maybe it's that one, but what would your top tip for quarantine work life be for other professionals?
Something similar. In the first couple of months of lockdown, I realized I would have these adult versions of meltdowns between like 5:30 and 7:30 p.m. And it's because it's a very short distance from the dining room / office into the living room. And after all those years of complaining about commuting, turns out I really needed a commute to decompress. So I started taking evening bike rides. And when I'm really lazy, I don't say go down to Central Park or up to the Bronx or what have you. I just bike up one-way street and come back down another one-way street and just do that for 30 minutes. But it clears my head, and then I can come back and zone out to Netflix far more successfully than I would have if I just took the 8 steps into this room.
I think we're all struggling with what reopening is going to look like, both across the museum industries and indeed in many other industries. Do you have a sense of when your institution might reopen?
Ooh, well, we're partially open. An interesting thing about DIA Art Foundation is that it's actually 11 locations and sites across the United States and 1 actually in Germany. And so our locations, which are the museum-like spaces, 2 of them opened in July and August, so DIA Bridgehampton and DIA Beacon, the place in upstate New York that we're most famous for. And then in 2020, DIA Chelsea was already closed for construction, and so it just isn't supposed to be open now. And then the artist sites, which are these major site-specific artworks, both in the natural landscape and in certain urban landscapes. So a couple of them are in Soho. Some are open and some are not open because of the complications of these site-specific works. But Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty or Nancy Holt's Sun Tunnels, both of which are in Utah, and Max Neuhaus's Times Square, which is, you guessed it, in Times Square, those are just open to the public at any time. So DIA is actually mostly open, and well, who knows what the future will bring, but on our way to being fully open.
A lot of institutions, including NMPS, including the University of Chicago, have had to switch to online programming to reach their audiences. What are some online programs that you've enjoyed recently?
Actually, I think what I've most enjoyed have been things that are not necessarily at big institutions. So I was not a book club person until lockdown happened. And so I have joined 2 book clubs and a book study, actually. So things that one could do in your pajamas at any time, I just get to do a little bit more openly in my pajamas.
What is your clearest memory of one of our in-person NMPS conferences?
So I have actually 2 really good NMPS memories. The first one, which is probably the one that will get people a little bit more excited, is I got to go in 2014. It was in Boston, and I, through a mutual friend who was there, kind of hooked up with a few other women who were there, and we were all in our 30s and 20s, and we go to lunch together. And there was one night we went to dinner and we did a toast and we said, "To the future of publishing." And in the 6 years since then, all of us have continued in the industry. Some of us have actually moved on to some pretty fancy titles. And it turned out it was true. We were the future of publishing. And then the other fun story is I actually got to present at that 2008 conference on members magazines when I was at the MCA. And my presentation was on the Saturday morning, 9 a.m. slot. And I had a big freak out at like 2 o'clock in the morning and rewrote my index cards. This was as I was in the midst of packing up my apartment because I left Chicago after 11 years in the city the day after NMPS ended that year. So I gave my presentation, went to the next session, then went to Susan Rawson's closing speech. But I had to leave in the middle because I literally had to go meet my dad who had the U-Haul outside of my apartment because I was packing up to physically leave Chicago for New York in less than 24 hours after that NMPS.
Well, okay, I'd never heard that. And you did it with style. And if there was ever any doubt that we picked the right chair for 2021, there it is. The dedication to NMPS through the years, even when it was unsung, is truly impressive.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. What tips might you have for aspiring museum publishers in our audience?
So if you're relatively early in your career, I got most of my jobs because it's a kind of small community through just staying in contact with people. So keep doing the hard work that you're doing and being the pleasant person that you are, and just staying in contact, and you'll find out where the openings are, and that will be where your next opportunity will probably show up. The other thing I would say is one thing that really helped me to prepare to become the director of publications at DIA is that I love all sorts of art publications. So I read art magazines, I read artist books, I read lots of weird little things online, and those things are just sort of buried into my subconscious. But there come these moments when I'm in meetings or fantasizing about what a future publication could be, and all that stuff comes out about, I remember that cool thing I saw in that magazine once. And we won't do the cool thing necessarily, but we'll figure out a way to just sort of extract what was so interesting about it to me and maybe apply it to something we're doing in the future. So just keep in contact with people and like kind of keep up to date about cool things other people do.
That's a great tip. Seeking inspiration from things around you is always a great idea. In a similar vein, though, on the other side of the coin, what would you tell freelancers in or adjacent to the museum publishing industry right now?
We love you. For those of us whose budgets are a little bit tighter right now, we miss you. And given that every institution I've worked at has heavily relied on freelance labor, and it's no secret, everyone knows this, when I made less money in this industry, I freelanced on the side too. And that's how the computer that I'm looking at you from, because it's my personal computer, got paid for, and vacations and things like that. So I think it's pretty openly acknowledged that our industry runs on freelance labor. And if we haven't talked to you in a while, we will be back because you're so key to what we do.
I want to ask a couple more questions about you and the space that you're in and the things around you right now. How many books would you say you have in your apartment?
I feel like no matter what I say, I'm going to be judged. So I think I'm probably just under 300. I feel like that's tiny. I feel like it's big for New York City, but it's also really tiny. And I want to say in my defense, when I lived in Chicago, there came a period where I needed to buy another bookshelf. And I said I wouldn't because I needed to control the book addiction. And so I refused. And then for like 10 years, I became a dedicated library user. And not only was it great for my budget, but also I got a different sense of my neighborhood, and Chicago being really a city of neighborhoods. It was a great way to check in with like everyone else in my community. And that sort of informed how I got really acculturated to Harlem and to New York, and the libraries are closer to the workplaces that I've worked in. So being a library person is the reason why I only have about 300 books.
That is an excellent and unexpected, I will say, shout out to the library, but I'm going to add my own because I too have found that in quarantine, the Chicago Public Library District has been invaluable with ebooks. I sound like a commercial, right? With ebooks, and they are doing a great job of, quarantine pickups and drop-offs and things. So shout out to them if anyone feels the need. Last question, equally loaded, but let's see if you can provide as diplomatic an answer to this next question as you did very eloquently in that last one. What is your favorite trade book?
I'm glad you brought up diplomacy. I feel like I cannot, I don't have favorites. That's the problem. I read too many. They're also wonderful. Actually, sometimes they're not always also wonderful, but like I get something interesting out of them each time, even when it's a total failure for me. But in terms of favorite, there's no way to answer that. I just have to say what I'm reading right now. So I'm gonna do a little show and tell. Leanne Simpson's This Accident of Being Lost will blow your mind. I don't know why it took me so long, but I finally have gotten to my first Jacqueline Woodson, and why did it take me so long? I got in a fun conversation with the editorial assistant recently where I made a crack about what is to be done, and we started talking about Lennon's What Is to Be Done, and I still have this from a Soc class. So I started rereading the Lennon anthology. Don't ask, I went to the University of Chicago, okay? For work, I'm working on a Michelle Wallace book, because hopefully I'll get to do something with her soon. I like poetry. Natalie Diaz is amazing. Well, she's a MacArthur genius. Come on. Of course, she's amazing. And also in another one of those, like, what took me so long? I finally picked up the new Jim Crow, and 2020 might have been the year to finally pick up the 10th anniversary edition. I'm bad with mirrors, so I'm not going to get the sticker just right. It's 10 years old, and I'm finally reading it, and thank God I'm reading it. So that's what's on. That is 1/5. I'm bad at math, of the 300 or something. Yes. 1/50th.
Bad at math, maybe. I don't know. I haven't figured it out myself yet. So, but excellent at providing recommendations to the community. Thank you, Kamilah, for all of your suggestions there. That last point was a lovely way to inspire the keep reading idea that you had earlier, and in keeping connected. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.